Friends, allies, and Americans, welcome to the Defense of Democracy podcast, where we tell the stories of folks who defend your children's rights by advocating for inclusive public school systems and who fight for diversity across our nation. I'm your host, Karen Svoboda. Let's get into it. And my guest today on the Defense of Democracy podcast is Steve Hofstetter. Steve, welcome to the show. It is so good to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, I want to, first of all, there's so much that I really want to talk to you about. You're a comedian. You make people laugh. That's your livelihood. But what really I find so striking is the parallel between comedy and advocacy. And raising awareness and I don't want to immediately go into like a downer and like serious conversation, but I'm really, really impressed at that. And I want to hear kind of what you think of that. Is that deliberate? Is that?
Well, I don't think there's necessarily a parallel between comedy and advocacy. I think it can be used for it. There are two basic schools of thought. There's the idea that comedy is escapism, and, it helps you forget your problems. And then there's also comedy, helps you deal with your problems. I'm of that second camp, and, but not everybody is, and that's okay. I'm totally fine with it being escapism. For me, it's more about addressing things right in the face.
Yeah. And you have certainly done that. I have seen you operate with hecklers, and you seem to kind of invite it, because then it becomes, okay, no. You do not invite it. Okay.
No, I definitely don't invite it. I'm good at it, but okay. I would much rather just do my set. Mm-hmm. It's something where, like, I invite crowd participation at a certain point in the show. Like, after the material, we'll do a Q&A so the people who want to participate can. Mm-hmm. But no, I definitely don't invite heckling. In fact, I think the reason heckling bothers me isn't because I'm being interrupted. It's because everybody else is being interrupted. And these people, there's hundreds of people who made their night about this show, who, got a babysitter and made plans, and some of them, drove in, sometimes even flew in. And the idea that one person is like, it's about me, like, no, it's not. It's, to get a little philosophical for a second, the basic human instincts are survival of the self, survival of the species, and mattering. Survival of the self is something we all take care of on a daily basis, and we're not typically worried about when we go to a show. Survival of the species is something that, a lot of us have accepted as a foregone conclusion. Obviously, we're worried about climate change now, or some of us are. And then mattering then becomes the most important one, because the other two are kind of set for most people. So some people try to matter by, putting their all into their family, and some people try to matter by killing at their career, and some people try to matter by joining an HOA and being a jerk. And, sometimes people try to matter by interrupting a show, and that's not okay.
Yeah. Excellent point. Excellent point. Speaking of people who matter, now I'm going to speak to you as a mom,
okay,
and an ally. I
will not be responding as a mom, just a heads up.
But if you did, I would not have a problem with it.
Fair.
I have 7 children. We're blended. They didn't all come out of my body, but I have 7 kids. Yeah. And I have, of my 7 children, 4 of them are members of the queer community. I sometimes joke and I say I have an L, a G, a B, a T, right? Like I've got, yeah. And they matter so much. And what I have witnessed as a parent and as the executive director of an organization like Defense of Democracy is this, it's giving me chills to even talk about it, but this attack on children who deserve to see themselves in books and who deserve to be acknowledged. And I am so humbled and honored by voices like yourself who are supportive and openly supportive. And I believe you're well, I know you're white, but white straight man that voice in someone with privilege is really critical. And I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Well, I appreciate that. And it's sometimes I actually get pushback from some members of the community saying that, like, don't speak for us, etc. And what I try to explain is, like, I'm not speaking for anyone but myself.
Yes.
If I'm speaking for anyone else, it might be other cis straight white guys telling them that we need to do better.
Yeah.
And no movement has ever succeeded without allies from outside of the movement, and because otherwise there wouldn't need to be a movement. So for me, I really don't see it as much. I just see it as being, a basically decent human.
Yes.
And it sucks that it's needed. It like And one of the weird things when it comes to comedy is comedy was always progressive. Comedy was always on the left. There'd be two or three, right wing voices here and there. But for the most part, when you think of any great comedian, they were progressive. However, COVID changed things a lot because I hate to say it, but comedians tend to be a very selfish breed. We I mean, that makes sense. It's someone who believes that what they have to say is important enough to be said into a microphone from a stage. So obviously, there's got to be a bit of ego there. But the most important thing to a comedian has always been stage time. And when COVID changed that, when COVID prevented comedians from, doing our job and earning our livelihood, there were comedians who suddenly went to the right, because just the idea of, first of all, I mean, COVID shouldn't have been politicized to begin with, but suddenly they started going toward the right. And the one of the biggest problems in government today is not government itself, but the factions. And on the right, if you believe anything that the right believes, they will take you in and say, you're one of us. If you don't believe one of the things the left believes, you may as well not be on the left at all.
Right.
And it bothers me so much, this circular firing squad that we have.
Sorry.
And because of that, when some comedians started pushing back against COVID regulations, which I was not one of those, I understand the idea for the need for public safety, then there were people on the left who immediately were like, well, you're not one of us anymore. And those comedians found homes on the right. And so part of the reason there are more regressive voices in comedy than there used to be is the fault of progressives who hear one thing they don't agree with and then suddenly go, you're dead to me. And we need to stop doing that.
Wow. And I just want to unpack that a little bit, because that
was a lot. I'm a
no, it's fine, but I really want to go to, I mean, this conversation really can go anywhere as far as I'm concerned. But I'm always looking at it from the viewpoint of, defense of democracy and the mission that we have. As someone who was, so I will talk about nonpartisanship. I want to get to that, because someone, and it kind of weaves into what we were talking about before, someone like yourself, white, straight, privileged, giving the courage a lot of times for other white, straight, privileged people to speak out, which I see as my job as well. Like I often say, if one person will stand up, then 10 people around you will have the courage to stand up, because you are going to be targeted. You've been targeted. I know I've been targeted. So giving that courage to others is so critical. And I just, there's some reconciling that I really struggle with the Republican Party, because I was raised by a conservative, Republican, Christian, Irish man who was a wonderful human being. And I try to remind myself that they're still out there. And one of our founding members is actually checks all those boxes. He is an old school. I love this guy. His name's Rick. He reminds me of my dad. And he'll be like, I voted for Ronald Reagan in 1980, but he also gives zero fucks what the Republican Party thinks when he comes out, because he has 2 adult gay daughters that he is a fierce advocate of. So I really struggle with that. I'm like, please, if there are Republicans out there and moderates who see the great wrongs that are being done to our marginalized communities, that use your voices and I mean, maybe it is too late for the Republican Party as a whole. I just, it's been like this kind of evolving slow motion train wreck for forever. I just had a little hope there. I guess that wasn't really a question; it was more of a statement.
Yeah, but to speak to that, a conservative and a modern Republican are two different things, and
Right.
I will all day have the conversation about Keynesian versus classical economics. I happen to think classical economics is backwards, but I'm okay if someone disagrees. I'm perfectly fine having the conversation about privatizing tolls on roads. Not something I necessarily agree on, but I'll have that conversation. I will have the conversation about wasteful spending and gerrymandering and politics. What I will not have a conversation on is basic morality. And that's the difference. And someone, even 10 years ago, someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene would not have even been eligible for a primary. She would have been a fringe candidate at best. Matt Gaetz would have been removed already. Like, there are so many. Kevin McCarthy never would have been a Speaker of the House. Like, there is a difference between a Mitch McConnell, who, don't get me wrong, I find to be pure evil, but there is a difference between pure evil and absolute insanity.
Right.
There's a difference between someone being selfish and pushing their own agenda versus someone's agenda being hurting others. And that is unfortunately where we are right now. And I can have Republican friends. I cannot have friends who are MAGA. I can't, because that is not a conservative philosophy. That is not a difference in governing. It's a difference in humanity.
Wow. It is. 100% with you on that. So one of the things that I have seen you do is wear a dress at a comedy show in, I believe it was Tennessee.
Yes, Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Can we talk about that?
Sure. A couple of fun behind the scenes things. So that club in particular, the owner is pretty right wing. And I didn't know that until this happened, because I could tell he was bothered by this. I didn't tell them ahead of time. I told them when I got there. And the reason I told them when I got there was, hey, here's a heads up. In case anything happens, you should know. I'm just being respectful and professional. But I didn't ask permission. I just told them I was going to do that. He said something to me that was a little ridiculous. First of all, I think it was a Sunday night, and tickets started at $25. It was like $50 for the front, $25 for general admission. And because it was my crowd, and that's, I purposefully, I always try to charge, low enough that, like, it's not a burden to my fans, but high enough that people don't just wander in off the street.
Right.
And especially on like a day where there aren't normally shows. And so first the owner said something about how, like, oh, people aren't going to like it. And I was like, they're my fans. This is not, he's like, oh, we get a lot of walk-ups. And I was like, not today. You're not going to get a lot of $25 Sunday walk-ups. No, I've been doing this 21 years. I don't know. Also, he said that if anything were to happen, i.e. people be upset about it, etc., he said, you're on your own. I.e. club staff wasn't going to help.
Wow.
Well, I told the guys that I tour with that, and I said, I'm sure everything will be fine, but hang in the showroom for about 15 minutes after I start this. This is Chattanooga, Tennessee. Who knows? It is possible that someone just wanted to go see comedy and didn't bother to look up who they were going to see. Not likely, but it's possible. The other thing is that club does not have a real green room. there's like a couch in the manager's office.
Okay.
And the manager's office is located through the kitchen. So after I changed, I had to then walk through the kitchen into the showroom and walk around to the stage. A lot of comedy clubs are set up so that you have your own private green room and you open a door to the stage. Right. That's not what happened. So I had to walk through. And let me tell you, if there is one group of people known for being extremely tolerant when it comes to LGBT issues, it is line cooks in Chattanooga, Tennessee. So I just kind of walked right through the kitchen, just kind of, gave a nod like, "Hey boys, how are you?" And kept going. The crowd was extremely receptive, which was lovely. It was like hard to start my set, and you can see in the video I was nervous. I was genuinely nervous. I wasn't sure how it was going to go over. I didn't know how it would change my set. Mm-hmm. And also, like, it's not something I do. It's not something I'm comfortable with because it's not something I'm used to. Hell, the first time I ever wore a suit on stage, I felt weird. So I got a lot of comments from people saying things like, "Oh, you got to do this when you're in Alabama. You got to do this when you're in North Dakota." And I'm like, no, I am not. I'm not here to co-opt someone else's identity. Right. I did this as a protest, as a singular protest. Mm-hmm. Now, there might be another time where another protest calls for it, sure. But I'm not suddenly a drag performer.
Right.
And yeah. And again, to talk a little bit about, sometimes people on the left being idiots too, is I got so many comments about how, like, "Oh, that was the wrong color for you. Oh, you should have done this. And, oh, you would have slayed if you had done that." And, and I also just wore the same shoes I was wearing with my suit. Like, and I did that kind of on purpose to be like, this is not sexual. Right. This is not, I'm not dressing to impress here. I'm just putting on a dress. There's nothing sexual about this outfit. And I eventually commented and I was like, look at what you are doing. Look at how sexist this is. Because I never once got a comment on the color of my suit. And by the way, I wear some really bold colors. Mm-hmm. Like I have a lavender suit, I have a pink suit, I have a very bright blue suit, I have a purple velvet suit. I never once got a comment from someone saying this is the wrong color for you. And it is because we are so trained, no matter how progressive someone thinks they are, we are so trained to tell people about their fashion choices when it's not the typical outfit that a man wears. Mm-hmm. And so it was pretty disgusting to see that. And, I tried to put my foot down about like explaining that the whole point of drag is someone wearing what makes them comfortable and being loud and bold and, and telling someone that, oh, you should have done drag differently. Fuck all the way off.
Thank you. And this leads very, very nicely in every one of my podcasts, I do something called a volunteer shout out where I highlight a special volunteer. Sure. And the one I want to volunteer is actually someone who you sort of met. This is Diana Patton, and she was the transgender Navy veteran who kind of called out to you during the show up in Buffalo. Okay. And she's a huge fangirl. She's like, has done nothing but like been so excited and beside herself that you're going to be on the podcast.
And by the way, I want to be clear that she participated in the Q&A, not like called out.
Okay, I wasn't sure of that myself.
She didn't interrupt.
Oh, good. Okay, good.
Yeah,
good girl, Diana, because she's a lot sometimes, but she is actually the commander of Veterans Defending Democracy, which is an affiliate group with Defensive Democracy, and I think that she is also one of the classiest, most loving, kindest people I've ever met, and an advocate, not just for herself, but for others. This woman drove for 6 hours. I live in Dutchess County, New York. She's up in Buffalo. We had a crisis in one of our schools where the children were being attacked, and she drove down to speak at that school district and turned around when they tried to heckle her and say, "Oh, you're from out of town." And she turned around and said, everywhere there is a queer child is my family, and I'm here to speak for them. So the shout out today goes to Diana Patton, and especially grateful to her for making the connection with you, Steve, to be here with me and have this discussion. Sometimes I just talk about people and my heart just swells, and I meet these wonderful people, and you yourself saying that it's a matter of being a good human being, and I think that's what it boils down to in a lot of us these days. I always like to kind of end the podcast on a really positive note. And
Mm-hmm.
so to that end, I would like to ask you whatever you want to talk about that's going on that it makes you happy that you want to share with our listeners.
Sure. Something that makes me happy is I'm getting married this summer. I'm very excited about that, about, finding someone that, I want to spend my life with. And I think that anyone who has ever experienced that, for them to be against the idea of someone else living their life the way they want to is preposterous. Um, I, I happen to be lucky that I live in a society where the person I love, that's an easy thing.
Yeah.
And the way I typically dress is an easy thing. I'm wearing a t-shirt and a hoodie right now. It's, I've never had anyone try to hate crime me because of that. So it is wild to me when, something you said earlier about one of the, I think the founders of your org who has, two children who are part of the community. And I find that I have a theory that empathy, like a lot of aspects of our personality, is biological. And there are people who have more than others, and there are people who have more capacity for it than others. And those who don't have empathy, or who aren't leaning toward empathy, need something to happen to them for them to understand it. Whereas those of us who are lucky enough to be born with the capacity for empathy, or a higher capacity for empathy, can see it without it happening to them, or someone close to their lives. There are two types of people in the world. There are people who will let their dog shit on someone else's lawn and not even think to pick it up.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people who that would never even occur to them. And that second group, that's the group with empathy. So, what makes me happy is that there are a hell of a lot of people in that second group. And, and hopefully, in my lifetime, I have seen race relations get better. They're still not great, but I've seen them get better. I have seen gay marriage go from something that was seemingly never going to happen to not just legalized, but normalized. Progress is undefeated, but it's a sine curve. It's an upward sloping sine curve. And so it has its dips. But progress is undefeated. It eventually will continue moving on. And sometimes people forget, like I was born in 1979. I was born 15 years after the Civil Rights Act. That's it. And 15 years after I was born was 1994, which seems forever ago. So we are not nearly as far away from complete regression as we like to think we are. And so for those who are fighting, keep fighting. And, it's hard for me to say be patient. Like it seems rude and it seems uncaring. But if you look at the timeline of history, your day will come.
Steve, wow. You at earlier in the show, you mentioned comedians can have a selfish bone, or however you put it.
Yeah.
I want to really sincerely thank you for your generosity. For those who don't know, we had a little trouble kind of coordinating this call. I was actually 5 minutes late because of something that was going on in my home. Steve, this has been so worth the wait, and your patience and your generosity I'm sure you have better things to do. I have better things to do than to get up and have to do this kind of shit. Um, it is I'm internally grateful. Our listeners are grateful. I'm grateful on behalf of my children and my trans community, and I want to wish you the best of luck in your marriage and all the joy that follows from that. And thank you for joining me on the show today.
Thank you so much for your kind words. I really appreciate it. And for those folks who don't know my stuff yet, throw me a follow on social media and all that stuff. My new special that is almost done being edited is predominantly about this sort of thing. It's
Really
called Me, Myself, and Id. It's about identity. It's about there's a lot in there about trans rights, gay rights, women's rights, and just kind of how I didn't used to be as progressive as I am now, and how we grow and we learn and etc. But it's still stand up, so it's still.
And is that going to be available on your website? I
I don't
mean,
know yet.
okay.
When it's done being edited, which should be any day now, we'll shop it around. And the great thing about where we are now is, as artists and entertainers in this world, is that if I don't get the right offer, I'll just self-release, and that's perfectly fine. And what a world to live in.
Yes, absolutely, 100%. Well, keep me posted. I would love to share that as well. Steve, thank you again.
Absolutely. Thank you. Take care.